Hello, my name is Laura Weber. Who are the we're becoming? Welcome to the compost pile, where we address topics that explore the intersection of humanity and the natural world and celebrate the process of dynamic change that is healthy, co-creative, and great for the biosphere. This series will take on the topic of posthumanism as it relates to environmental justice, eco-justice, and eco-spirituality. First, what is posthumanism? Posthumanism is a philosophical worldview that shifts our focus away from anthropocentrism, or human centrism, that was celebrated and spread in the period of the Renaissance. The movement called humanism celebrated the triumph of all things human. By virtue of our ability to reason, human beings were placed above other living beings who were seen as under human control. Human agency reigned supreme, and that humans alone were thought to control, direct, and effect change with absolute autonomy in respect to the rest of creation. Beyond the precepts of humanism, post-humanist thinkers understand human agency to be distributed through interrelated, dynamic forces of nature and technology, a thriving web of life and interconnection in which humans participate but do not exercise complete control. In a post-human matrix, the human being is inextricably linked to the larger biospheric ecosystem of which we are a part, especially as we are completely and irrevocably enmeshed with technology. Posthumanism essentially decenters the placement of humanity above other life forms, and such an idea has been centuries in the making. The effects of the Renaissance, that period around 1450 to 1650, roughly in the Christian era, the effects of the Renaissance have been pervasive for the spread of Western civilization and our ideas about humanity's central role in the drama of existence. Since anthropocentrism gained ascendancy in the known world with Western civilization and the spread of the Abrahamic faith traditions, particularly Christianity, humanity has consistently occupied a place of prominence, centrality, even supremacy in ancient cosmogonies imported into Renaissance thinking. Many recall the oft-repeated translations of Genesis 1:28, God's command to humans to, quote, have dominion and, quote, subdue the earth. An exalted status indeed, since humans were said to be created in, quote, the image and likeness of God. This embedded hierarchy, reified by centuries of perceived and received patriarchal hermeneutics, provided a blueprint for better or for worse of a so-called divine order, placing God at the top of an ordered creation and humanity placed as not just stewards, but as lords and masters over a subservient creation. The drama of existence, featuring a divine man savior, was center stage in salvation history, while creation provided a backdrop, little more than scenery or commodified resources meant for human consumption and disposal. Posthumanism challenges claims to human centrality in the drama of existence, not so much by dismantling these ancient cosmogonies, but by understanding humanity as part of the web of life, embedded in the fabric of creation, not above or separated from creation. Today, as humanity is irrevocably enmeshed with technology and the environment, co-evolving with other forms of life, posthumanism presents challenges for environmental justice, eco-justice, and eco-spirituality. Posthumanism explores questions about what the world is when humans are no longer considered the center of the drama of existence. It requires that humanity re-examines who we are beyond our human community and what it means not just for humanity, but for the whole of creation when the age of anthropocentrism gives way to more expansive concepts of life, or as I like to call it, the wider we. In this first segment, we will explore the topic of environmental justice as it relates with posthumanism. Environmental justice may be understood as ensuring equitable access to Earth's goods and equitable protection from Earth's degradation for all human beings. The principles of environmental justice arose in the context of the civil rights movement of the 1960s and flowered into subsequent calls for an end to environmental racism. The pioneering work of Robert Bullard, who wrote Dumping in Dixie in the 1990s, constituted a clarion call for environmental justice. Bullard noted that people of color bear disproportionate adverse effects of environmental degradation and called for a revolution in socio-environmental thinking and praxis. Subsequently, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, defined environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, national origin, or educational level, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Fair treatment means that no population, due to policy or economic disempowerment, is forced to bear a disproportionate burden of the negative human health or environmental impacts of pollution or other environmental consequences resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations or the execution of federal, state, local, and tribal programs and policies, close quote. When environmental injustice is flagged, it is usually due to embedded systemic barriers to equitable access to Earth's goods and disproportionate health hazards and quality of life for people of color who bear the brunt of the negative effects of Earth's degradation in the form of exposure to air, water, or soil toxicity, environmental disease. If the causes of the inequities are addressed at their root, environmental justice ensues. Much of the progress made in environmental justice initiatives, unfortunately, has not significantly altered embedded systemic racism in respect to socioeconomic, political, and educational barriers. So let's dig a little deeper into the roots of racism. Racism, which imports systems of domination and subjugation embedded in worldviews that support a notion of a hierarchy of being, can be traced back to the Platonic dialogues, as well as Aristotle's Historia Animalium, and reached its full expression in Neoplatonists like Plotinus. The great chain of being, the scala naturae, often translated the chain of being, locates humans at the apex of a hierarchy of biological complexity, intelligence, and value. Central to this schema is the notion that there is a qualitative difference among humans as a group and humans as they relate with all other animals. Sociology professor Lisa Wade of Tulane University traces the roots of racism with a series of sociological images, an oft-repeated practice of juxtaposing images of people of color with images of primates served to exacerbate the rampant colonializing racism throughout Western expansion. The predominant colonial theory of race was the great chain of being, the idea that human races could be lined up from most superior to most inferior. That is, God, white people, and then an arrangement of non-white people with blacks at the bottom, says Professor Wade. When a great chain of being espouses a hierarchical arrangement that locates people of color beneath whites, a whole host of ethical, political, socioeconomic, and anthropological fallacies arise. In medieval thinking, please note at the top of the chain is an image of the divine being or God. Countless efforts among medieval metaphysicians to portray God at the apex of a great chain of being, superior to angels who were superior to white males, who were superior to people of color, superior to other animals, plants, and minerals, served to reinforce racist ideologies for centuries. Eventually, theological anthropologies challenged embedded notions of hierarchies of being, such as Black and feminist liberation theologies, but could not thoroughly eradicate systemic overreach. Institutionalized religions, socio-political, economic, and educational systems remain seriously compromised by racist praxis, language, ideologies, and anthropologies. When we begin to unravel systems of racial injustice, environmental injustice is closely related. Theological anthropology is often at issue, meaning our theological appraisal of what it means to be human is operative in our thinking about the environment. Our theological anthropologies, no matter how robust in their articulation and repudiation of environmental racism, are still inadequate to the task, mostly because their concept of we is still too limited. When our theologies of liberation and our theological anthropologies expand to include not only human life forms, but all life forms known to the biosphere, we begin to understand the scope and depth of our errors in thinking and praxis. Posthumanism is causing challenges for exponents of environmental justice precisely because our we is expanding now beyond anthropocentrism or human centrism. When humanity is no longer considered the center of the drama of life in the biosphere, and certainly not the apex of a hierarchy of being, it becomes clear that the environment itself cannot be relegated to secondary or tertiary status, nor considered extrinsic to questions of equitable access to Earth's goods and protection from Earth's degradation. We need a more expansive understanding of we, in other words, one that includes other than human life forms. While environmental justice is paramount to human-centered concerns, as Earth continues to suffer the deleterious effects of global climate change, excessive and irreversible consumption, waste, pollution, and toxicity, it is a shifting topic. Environmental justice must include and expand to justice for the whole oikos, the whole home, the biosphere as a living whole. Pope Francis's eco-encyclical Laudato Si was named Praise Be, alluding to his patron, St. Francis of Assisi, his famous prayer in praise of creation. The encyclical, called On Care for Our Common Home, promulgated in 2015, raised the matter of environmental justice to the level of universal ethical responsibility. Its central tenet is the interconnection of all life. And here's a quote. Everything is related, and we human beings are united as brothers and sisters on a wonderful pilgrimage, woven together by the love God has for each of his creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with brother sun, sister moon, brother river, and Mother Earth. The encyclical seeks to include environmental concerns as a moral obligation because all life is interconnected. Another quote, this is the basis of our conviction that as part of the universe called into being by one Father, all of us are linked by unseen bonds and together form a kind of universal family, a sublime communion, which fills us with a sacred, affectionate, and humble respect. Here I would reiterate that God has joined us so closely to the world around us that we can feel the desertification of the soil almost as a physical ailment, and the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement. But the encyclical stops short of dismantling the ancient order and instead invokes the hierarchical chain of being inherited through the centuries. This is another quote. This is not to put all living beings on the same level, nor to deprive human beings of their unique worth and the tremendous responsibility it entails, close quote. The Pope goes on to reiterate that human ill treatment within the human hierarchy is why environmental justice presents a moral imperative. Open quote. At times we see an obsession with denying any preeminence to the human person. More zeal is shown in protecting other species than in defending the dignity which all human beings share in equal measure. Certainly we should be concerned, lest other living beings be treated irresponsibly, but we should be particularly indignant at the enormous inequalities in our midst, whereby we continue to tolerate some considering themselves more worthy than others, we fail to see that some are mired in desperate and degrading poverty with no way out, while others have not the faintest idea of what to do with their possessions, vainly showing off their supposed superiority and leaving behind them so much waste, which, if it were the case everywhere, would destroy the planet. In practice, we continue to tolerate that some consider themselves more human than others, as if they had been born with greater rights. Close quote. One of the great modern commentators on moral ecology and evolutionary consciousness in the tradition of evolutionary paleontologist and mystic Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is Franciscan theologian Ilia Delio. Delio's critique of Laudato Si notes that Pope Francis's admonition to care for our common home lays bare the Church's own need to dismantle its own ecclesiological and metaphysical ancient hierarchies in a post-human context. She notes, Laudato Si is overly ambitious in trying to address the major problems of our world, including economic, technological, and environmental problems, by offering glimpses of a new theology without revisiting the doctrines of the Church in light of a new science. The document falls short of providing a reasonable theological ground for change. It winds up with exhortations on technology, economics, and ecology that are laudable, but not feasible without a theology that is able to navigate the work of God amidst the complexities of our age as we seek wholeness, being, and life. Church might best contribute to a new world by resolving its own internal theological tensions, including metaphysics, concepts of being and becoming, sin, salvation, human personhood, and final destiny. For theology deaf to the yearnings of the cosmos and the cries of humanity is incapable of uttering a transforming word of God. Delio joins a chorus of theologians, environmentalists, and ecofeminist philosophers in calling attention to the need for dismantling hierarchical arrangements of being before environmental justice can be pursued with integrity and gravitas. Delio notes, a medieval theology trying to address major world problems is bereft of transforming power. It is inspirational, but not gravitational. It is my belief that the unmaking of the Western world is not only the disconnect of the human mind from the material universe, it is the intransigence of world religions to change internally. Science has accepted structural revolutions over the last 500 years. However, Christianity, and other world religions for that matter, has remained ontologically fixed in its metaphysical structure. The Church is telling the world what needs to change, but if we listen carefully, the world is begging the Church to change. Close quote. Most telling for environmental justice advocates, as religious leaders and theologians grapple with embedded hierarchies, is that postmodern critiques call for a thoroughgoing revision of the way we think about and practice justice in respect to creation, and our incessant focus on ourselves as the center and apex of all meaning and existence. We may cry out incessantly for humanity to have equal rights to Earth's goods and equal protection from Earth's degradation, as environmental justice commands. But until we cry out for a more inclusive ecology, where creation itself is not relegated to a subservient role in the drama of existence, justice will not be rendered even for humanity. It is the hierarchical structure itself which needs dismantling. But how do we approach the task when the very building materials of our worldview incorporate ancient hierarchical structures of being? When the idea of a hierarchical structure is embedded in the very fabric of our imagination, understanding, languaging, mythologies, and our interface with creation, we must re-examine our creation ideologies, sacred narratives that tell stories about the origins of life. From shared biblical roots of the Abrahamic faith traditions, loving, that is, tendering the earth, was the original human vocation. Of the two stories of creation rendered in Genesis, the older of the two, from Genesis 2, can be examined in respect to its antecedents and its subsequent interpretation alongside Genesis 1's story. Genesis 2:15 is attributed to the Yahwist source, celebrating the feminine divine and the divine council. It represents the eldest source, celebrating creation as wisdom. It is a Sophia, wisdom source, drawing from earlier Sumero-Babylonian, Akkadian, and Egyptian creation ideologies. The Lord God then took the human and settled the human in the Garden of Eden to cultivate, from the Hebrew chabad, work, farm, till, serve, and care for, shamar, love, nurture, cultivate, tender creation. Main point of the elder tradition about creation and humanity's relationship with creation in Genesis 2 is this: tender the earth. It is highly relational, communal. It is about planting, nurturing, and yielding a rich harvest, hearkening back to antecedent ideologies that cast humans as slaves of the gods who were sent to cultivate and till the earth and reap its harvests for the gods to feast upon, exploiting humans to toil on their behalf. The Hebraic renderings soften the relationship of humans and creation, in that humans are cast as cultivators of creation, but not primarily as slaves of the divine. Rather, they are intended to be in harmony, sharing the fruits of the earth for their own nourishment and sustenance. By contrast, Genesis 1:27-28 represents the priestly source, a later source than the Yahwist, celebrating masculine divine ascendancy. It is a later source than Genesis 2, although placed earlier in the collection that became the Genesis creation narratives. It emphasizes a structural relationship of Yahwistic God to other gods. Yahweh is considered a maverick, conquering God, standing alone and above all others and creating at will, without need for human slaves to satiate divine hunger. Quote, God created man in his image, in the divine image he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, saying, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue, chayash, it. Have dominion, chada, over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that move on the earth. Main point in Genesis 1, humans are to, quote, have dominion over the earth, subdue the earth, close quote. This is the implicit hierarchy of being, with humans located at the top. What happened in the history of transmission of Genesis creation cosmologies? First, there was a preference for Genesis 1 as the interpretive key for Genesis 2. Instead of Genesis 2's paradigm of humans as caretakers, not overlords, as primary point of understanding, Genesis 1's paradigm of humans as over creation prevailed. It was used as an interpretive matrix for Genesis 2. In Christianity, the history of interpretation of creation etiologies preferred the ascendancy of John's Logos Christology and atonement soteriology, which relied on Genesis 1's understanding of Logos as primary, rather than Genesis 2's Sophia as primary. Logos Christology is even reflected in the opening lines of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, from John 1:1. Domination, hierarchy, separation, and subjugation is imported into Pauline interpretations of Christ as the head of the body, the church. Hierarchical arrangements followed structurally after the Roman Empire officially adopted Christianity as a state religion, mimicking Roman imperial structural hierarchy, mostly for expediency. Result of transmission in tradition is this: pervasive hierarchy so that salvation operates on a perfect divine human sacrifice who atones for the sins of the lower, lesser humans created in God's image, but faulty. Genesis 1 is forever embedded in art. Think, for example, of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Sacred music, mythologies, and structural paradigms like political philosophy, economics, education, and the natural sciences. Genesis 2 is relegated to the edges, only seen in respect to Genesis 1 schematic, which is one of hierarchy. Now, in 1967, medieval history professor Lynn White charged that embedded hierarchies of domination and separation cause the current ecological crises. And his claim was met with hostility from religious sectors. White's historical investigation essentially indicted thoroughly civilized or Christianized humanity for losing sight of care for Earth, calling St. Francis the patron of ecologists for his radical vision of creation. Later, in 2015, Pope Francis, Francis of Assisi's namesake, famously reflected on the interconnectedness of all life and our universal moral responsibility to care for our common home in the eco-encyclical Laudato Si. And it still missed the point about embedded hierarchies inherited from tradition and interpretation history of sacred ideological stories. In this first segment, we have been considering the topic of environmental justice as it relates to posthumanism. In our next installment, we will be considering the topic of eco-justice, or justice for the whole oikos, or home, in light of posthumanism. Stay tuned.